Our study tonight is Revelation chapter 13. Now, I could go through this chapter really fast, and I just thought it was better to slow down. So tonight we're only going to do the first 10 verses. This is a chapter, and in particular this study, that makes me really, really glad I'm saved. Because I won't be here when this stuff happens. And if you've given your heart to Jesus Christ, neither will you. Let's read it together, please. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power, and his throne, and great authority. Now, we're not talking just authority. This is that Greek word mega, so it's huge authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God, and to slander his name, and his dwelling place, and those who live in heaven. And by the way, that's us. He was given power to make war against the saints, and to conquer them. Would you highlight the "and" to conquer them? And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. He, and I would add tonight, she who has an ear, let him and let her hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. Father, you know I don't like scary stuff, Lord. Never have. And this chapter is one of those chapters that is terrifying even to think about. Again, Lord, can we give you thanks and honor you and give you glory tonight, because we won't be here. Having surrendered our hearts to Jesus Christ, we're going to be protected from this time that's going to come upon those who live upon the earth. And we, Jesus, will be in heaven with you at our wedding banquet. The contrast is overwhelming to me, Lord. And because it is, I pray that if there's even one here tonight who doesn't know you, if they're not born again, I pray that he or she would surrender their heart to you and escape all of this that's going to come upon all of those who live on earth. Jesus, our kingdom is not here. May we look up. May we look higher and higher. The more difficult things get here on this earth, would you lift our heads higher and higher so that we can see Jesus? Lord, for that man or that woman who might be here tonight, who doesn't know you, add them to your family. For your glory. For the rest of us, Lord, help us to love you more than ever before. And because we love you, give us a sense of the urgency of the hour in these last days. We love you, Jesus. We thank you and we praise you. Now minister to us for your glory. Amen. I told you before, at least in my prayer, I don't like scary stuff. I never have. I remember my older brother playing a trick on me. He knew I didn't like scary stuff. I wouldn't watch scary movies. I didn't want to hear scary stories. When all the other kids were doing that, I was somewhere else. It didn't matter where else. I just had to be somewhere else. And so one day he decided to play a trick on me. We went to the Los Angeles County Fair. It was in my city where I grew up, Pomona Valley. At the time, it was the largest county fair in the world, and they had all of these really fun things, and my brother took me directly to the fun house. And he said, Ronnie, do you want to go in the fun house? Well, what 7-year-old wouldn't want to go in the fun house? Of course I want to go in the fun house. And we went in, we started taking these little sharp turns, and there were mirrors everywhere, and they had you feeling creepy stuff, and I was so afraid, and suddenly, out of nowhere, comes this face. And he had all this makeup on, it was bloody, and I freaked out, and I just started running. Now, I was lost in there, so I was running for a long time. But I don't like scary stuff. And in this chapter, we're going to see the mask removed from the man that we call the Antichrist. We're going to see power given to him from the devil himself. And while we won't get to him tonight, next week we're going to see the false prophet, the devil's unholy trinity, the counterfeiter that he is. And we're going to see, I think, a lot that explains what we're going through in these last days here on earth. I warn you all the time that as we get closer to the return of Jesus for his church, things aren't going to get better. Now that I've encouraged you, understand that we need to know these things. We're watching them happen around us. And we need to be more motivated than ever to tell the people that we truly care about our Jesus, the real Lamb of God. As we move into chapter 13, John's vision moves from heaven. 12 said the dragon, that ancient serpent, the devil. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. Now, whenever you see a sea, prophetically, it represents nations, and almost exclusively Gentile nations. And the beast that we meet here coming out of this sea is the one that we call the Antichrist. We've already talked about him at length, but unfortunately we're not done. And if the symbolism is consistent, and I think if you have a strong hermeneutic, it has to be consistent, it means that the Antichrist will be a Gentile. Now, that's problematic for a lot of people because they claim that Jews would never accept a non-Jew as their Christ. But I want you to remember something. The deception is going to be so extreme in the last days that we're warned that they will believe even the lie. And again, it's only my opinion, but I believe that's one of the lies that they're going to believe. Now, why would Jews believe? Well, remember, this is the man who's going to allow them to rebuild their temple. In the first 3.5 years, he's going to have his happy face, his political face on, and he's going to be hailed as a man of great peace, and he's going to solve the problem that nobody's ever been able to solve, not since the time of Isaac. From here on out, we've seen difficulty between the Jews and almost every other country. But in this particular case, this man, the Antichrist, is going to solve the problem. He's going to let the Jews build their temple on Solomon's temple. They're going to measure it. They're going to find that the foundation is just where it's supposed to be, and next to the Islamic mosque, the Dome of the Rock, and they're going to coexist together. We can't even get Jews and Arabs to sit down at a table together. And he's going to solve this problem, and he's going to be hailed by people everywhere as the man of peace. You talk about Nobel Peace Prizes, they'll just automatically name it after him. Of this beast, the Antichrist, it says he had 10 horns and 7 heads. Now we're getting into symbolism here, so pay attention. With 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. Now the 10 crowns signify that the beast has authority over 10 nations. Again, prophetically, when you see horns in Scripture, they symbolize power or authority. And the 10 nations being spoken of here, that he's going to take control of, is a revived Roman Empire. People say, well, there's no Roman Empire now, but that's why it has to be revived. Rome is the only empire in the history of the world that's never been defeated militarily. Basically, they just send themselves out of existence. The 7 heads, we are told later in chapter 17, represent the city of 7 hills, a clear reference to the city of Rome. Much more on that when we get to chapter 17. Now, this 10-nation or 10-kingdom alliance is a fulfillment of Daniel chapter 10. Now, we're not too far out of our Daniel study on Wednesday nights. So you remember that was where the 10 nations, or those in power, in the 70th week of Daniel or in the Great Tribulation, the time that we're studying now. Too many, and especially Americans, it seems impossible that the focus of world power could ever move across the ocean to Europe. It just seems so silly to us. But we already see attempts being made in this world to focus the economic power in the East. Now, Brexit has continually been frustrated over the euro. And while it's years now since Brexit was voted in, Brexit's still kind of hanging on and say, hey, don't forget about me, don't forget about me. That 10-nation European alliance is still strong, and the euro still represents an effort to unify the European nations under a common monetary system. Because of that, it's not at all unreasonable to think that once the money moves, so too will the power. Now, I know for a lot of us, because we live in the United States, this is hard to hear. We think, well, we're the strongest nation on the face of the earth. Well, I'm afraid that we're in the middle of sinning ourselves out of the favor of God as well. And we have to be really, really careful about that. You know, empires come and go. God establishes kings and kingdoms, and he deposes kings. Well, we need to be careful, because the United States of America appears nowhere at all in prophecy as it relates to the Great Tribulation. He said, the beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. You know what's interesting to me? This is also in reference to Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel's vision, he saw the 3 animals mentioned here in reverse order. John is looking backward. Daniel was looking forward. And I think that perspective is probably more important than we really understand. Now, the leopard in Daniel's vision, you remember, represented the Greek Empire established by Alexander the Great. The leopard is fast. The leopard is sleek and sneaky. One of the keys, of course, to Alexander's military power was the speed, the lightning-like speed with which his forces attacked. Well, the Antichrist, we're told here, is going to have some of those same characteristics. At first, he's going to begin slow, and then when the power comes, he's going to move very, very quickly. And he will be like a cat. Cats are evil. Sorry, cat lovers. But cats are cunning and cold. You know, you can go to your dog and say, come here, baby. You'll come sit. You try to call a cat to do something, or ask a cat to fetch something, and they just look at you like, this is my house, not yours. In our world. So the Antichrist spirit is not the Antichrist. There are a lot of people in positions of power and authority that are anti-Christ. They're opposing Christ, but they're not the definite article Antichrist. So we have to understand that this is one man who's going to come onto the scene seemingly out of nowhere. Now, we can speculate all we want, but nobody really knows. But I like to think that this man is alive right now. If he's alive, that means we're all that much closer to the end. I hope he's, 40. We won't be here, but the world is being prepared for his arrival. As beautiful and loving as Jesus is, the Antichrist is just as repulsive and hateful. Just as Jesus came to save the world, the Antichrist comes to destroy the world and to condemn entire generations to eternity in hell. That's his plan. That's his mission. And we can never forget that. You know, we Christians, we're quick to blame the devil for stuff. One of my favorite cartoons that I've ever seen was the devil sitting on a rock, and they have tears coming off, and somebody comes over and says, "Mr. Devil, what's the problem?" And he says, "It's those Christians. They keep blaming me for stuff that I haven't had the opportunity to do." We Christians are so conscious of the devil, but just like God became a man, the devil is also going to become a man, in the sense that the devil is going to inhabit the man. That's why it says the dragon, the devil, gave the beast his power and his throne and his great authority. And that's troubling to a lot of us, because we like to think as Christians that God has all the control. God has all of the authority in this world. But we want to remember that Satan is called the little g god of this world, or the prince of the air, or the ruler of the air. And he was given dominion over this earth by Adam and Eve when they fell. And so when Jesus comes way back at the beginning of our study in Revelation to claim the title deed to the earth, he's establishing once and for all that the earth is his. And he's come back to redeem it. Remember, John was crying because no one was found who is worthy to open the scroll. And here comes Jesus, who is worthy to open the scroll. But make no mistake, in the world that we live in, and the world makes a lot more sense when we understand this, the devil is really the little g god of this world. He's the one calling the shots. And his decision here in these last days is to give the Antichrist his power and his throne and his great authority. It's almost like he's passing a baton. And he's saying, okay, the end is near now. You take over. You do the work. Because Satan realizes that as God became a man, he also has to have his man. We'll talk more about the evil counterfeit trinity in our study next time. Now, this dragon gives the Antichrist his power and authority for the first 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. That's the time when the Antichrist will be seen as a man of peace. But in the middle, Satan is actually going to enter into him and empower him supernaturally in ways that we can't even imagine. And that's when that mask is going to be ripped off. And he'll show his true colors. For 3.5 years, a man of peace, saying, oh, come on, let's all come together, have a Coke, sit around the campfire. But not so. At the 3.5 year mark, he's going to be tired. The devil has always wanted to be worshipped by God. We'll see that in a moment. Or worshipped by men, and now he's frustrated. And at the 3.5 year mark, the abomination that causes desolation will occur. He will set up an image of himself in the Holy of Holies and demand to be worshipped by Jews. Now remember, Satan hates Jews. The Antichrist will hate Jews. He will humor them for a time. But finally he's going to have enough. And he's going to demand to be worshipped. Jews, of course, we know will not worship false gods. And the result is going to be a war. Look at verse 3. One of the heads of the beast seemed, the King James says, as if it had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Now, I remember as a 13-year-old when JFK was assassinated. It was a traumatic experience. It was nothing but JFK for more than a week on television. I was expecting Russia to attack. I mean, it was a really frightening time. But imagine what would have happened if JFK would have came to life. Well, that's exactly what seems to be happening here. Because the beast has supernatural power, it's satanic, but it's still supernatural. Signs and wonders are going to be prominent in the world in those days. Now, here's where this gets a little tricky. I'm going to give you a couple of different concepts of what might be going on here. That one head seems to have a fatal wound has led most people to assume that this represents an assassination attempt. An assassination attempt. If this is true, there are two possibilities. The first is that the wound only appeared fatal, but wasn't really fatal. But this is important enough to be mentioned 3 times in this chapter. In the final mention in verse 14, we get information that it was inflicted by a sword, but the man recovered. In Zechariah chapter 11, verses 16 and 17, we're given a little bit more detail. Some of his wounds are described. And the wounds seemed to be fatal. Perhaps the news media of the day will say, it doesn't look good, and they weren't as bad as initially thought. That's one possibility. But the other possibility, and I view this one as the most likely of the two, the beast actually was dead and raised to life by the devil's power. Now, if this is true, it means that God allows this to happen. And immediately we have to ask ourselves, would God do such a thing? Well, the answer is yes, if in fact this is part of his plan for judgment. I want you to think about something for a couple of minutes. If Jesus has come and left heaven, he was born as a baby. We just celebrated that recently at Christmas. And he grew and he was without sin. And he walked all the way to the cross and died for us. And he's been reaching out over and over in the Old Testament prophets all day long. My arms are outstretched. He's always looking to draw men and women to himself. And if they don't come, doesn't it seem likely, or at least possible, that if they refuse to come to the real man who's been killed and raised from the dead, that God, through this deception, would allow them to have a counterfeit miracle so people could make a choice. You know, people, if they won't believe what is true, they'll believe anything is. One of the real dangers of the church culture that we live in, where people are always chasing after miracles. I got my miracle, I want my miracle. Is signs and wonders don't save people. And in the end times, God's going to give them signs and wonders. And when the signs and wonders occur, they're going to gladly receive the counterfeit, having rejected the true Son of God. Just a guess here, but I think this is part of the lie. We talk about the lie. It's a definite article, so it's the primary one. I think personally this is it. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. What more powerful delusion could there be than somebody raising from the dead? Now remember, it won't be long before the 2 witnesses are going to rise from the dead. God's saying, I'm still in charge here. But the idea here is this is where evil is going to go. Now there's one more possibility which is espoused by those who deny the miraculous. I don't ascribe to this, but I'll just throw it out there for your consideration. Their explanation is that the head that is wounded, which appeared to be fatal, is symbolic of Rome's empire. I mean, we can easily say the Roman Empire appears dead, but that it will be revived and come back to life. Those who deny the miraculous explain it away that way. I think to deny the miraculous during the Great Tribulation is a really dangerous thing to do. Verse 4 says, men because he rose, or because the wound that seemed fatal turned out not to be. Men worship the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worship the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can make war against him? I think this sort of validates the fact that he really was dead and rose from the dead. They're saying, somebody tried to kill him, it was successful, and he just rose. There's no use fighting him. There's no use resisting him again. Now remember, worship is what the devil has always wanted from the very beginning. Remember his 5 I wills from Isaiah chapter 14, beginning in verse 13. This is Satan's heart. You said in your heart, and here's his 5 I wills, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. That's all Satan's ever wanted. Imagine how frustrating and how irritating it is for him when we sit here in a place like this tonight and worship God in song. Imagine how frustrating it is at your own homes when you get up in the morning and you just go to get alone with Jesus so you can worship him. I envy those of you who can play guitars and play pianos and you've got them in your home and you can have worship like that. You know, I just sort of go take a walk with Jesus and worship him. But Satan hates that because that's the one thing that he always wanted. That men would worship him and declare that there's none like him and that he's futile to be resisted has always been the desire of his heart. You remember he even tried to have Jesus worship him. When Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted directly by the devil. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 9, the devil said to Jesus, all of this, the kingdom of the world, all of this I will give if you will bow down and worship me. That's all he's ever wanted. He's not going to get it. Verse 5 says, the beast was given, and this is going to be a theme, we're going to see it 3 times, was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise his authority for 42 months. Now, repeatedly, this 42 months, 12,600 days, or 12,000, don't have it here, but from last week's study, 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. It says he opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. Now, this is quite a list to slander. He's going to blaspheme God. I want you to remember that there's going to be a great revival going on in the earth. And there are going to be people who refuse to take the mark of the beast. We're going to talk about that next week as well. The number of the beast is 666, whatever in the world that means. But the people that refuse to take the mark of the beast, he's going to blaspheme God in his threats against them. He's going to slander God's name. He's going to slander heaven. But not only that, he's going to slander those of us who are in heaven. I believe one of the deceptions is going to be that we're going to be blamed, we Christians who have been raptured, we're going to be blamed for all of the evils in the world. Now that they're gone, we can go into a new age together. We can come together in peace and unity. And remember, next week we're reintroducing religion into the world. And there's going to be a one world religion, and everybody's going to get along, and everybody's going to proclaim that this is the way, the Antichrist is the leader. And we're going to be the ones who are blamed for the mess in this world. The Antichrist will be a wonderful orator. He will be able to hold people in the palm of his hands just by speaking. The idea here is that there'll be no voice in the world strong enough to stop his blasphemous words. That is, until Jesus comes to earth. Verse 7 says he was given. There it again. Now, that he was given, it was the devil's power, but it was God who actually allowed this to happen. There's no authority except that which is given, and God is the one who's controlling the use of that authority. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. Now, this is a place that's problematic for some people. They read this and say, well, see, this proves that the church is on the earth during the Great Tribulation. The rapture of the church can't be before the tribulation because this verse proves that the saints are on the earth. And of course, who's the saints? We're the saints. Paul says it over and over and over. Now, there's some problems with that. Satan, it says, was given power to overcome the saints. And if they claim that the saints refer to the church of Jesus Christ, and in so doing, they say, well, see, that proves that the church is on the earth during this terrible time. Well, they've got a problem with Jesus. All we have to do is look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. Jesus said to Peter, and I say to you that you are Peter. Now you remember what was going on. Who do people say that I am? Well, some say you're Jeremiah, some say you're Elijah, some say you're the Christ. And then Jesus looked at him. And here's the question for all of us today. Who do you say that I am? Who's Jesus to you? Is he your Lord and Savior? Now remember, if you say yes, and most of us, if not all of us here tonight are saved, if you say yes, then you got to do what he says. Are you living your life like he's your Lord? Peter, who is about to deny him when Jesus says this to him. And who do you say that I am? And Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon, because this has been revealed to you not by flesh and blood, but by my Father. And Jesus responds by saying, and I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and here's the key, and the gates of Hades shall not overpower it. Now, who's right? Are the saints, the church on the earth? We just read that they overcame the saints, they overpowered the saints, and to conquer the saints. And Jesus said that the saints, the church, can't be overcome. So if that's true, there's got to be another answer regarding the identity of these saints. And I think the answer is so simple. And we did deal with this at length on our Daniel study on Wednesday nights. Because his prophecy is loaded with references to the saints during the Great Tribulation. In fact, there's a very specific statement he makes which impacts our understanding of this verse. It's Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. It says, he, the Antichrist, will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. So now we've got our 3.5 years from Daniel chapter 7. So the identity of the saints is simple. It's Jews. Daniel knew nothing of the church. In all of Daniel's prophecies, as far as he went to the end of time, there was never a reference to the church. So from Daniel's perspective, the saints of God were Jews. And these are the ones who are on the earth. These are the ones who are overcome. These are the ones who are going to have to flee as though on wings of eagles to the rock city of Petra in modern-day Jordan. So Daniel, because he knew nothing of the church, and because here we got the reference again to the last 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, this is a reference to Jews, the nation of Israel, who are going to be preserved by God for the last 3.5 years. If Jesus said the church cannot be overcome, the gates of hell will not conquer or prevail, then we've got to remember that Jesus always keeps his promises. We continue in the rest of verse 7. And he, the Antichrist, was also given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Now, history is replete with men who've tried to conquer the entire world. We can go all the way back to Nimrod, building the Tower of Babel. I'm going to build myself above the judgment of God. That's what they're doing. Men wanted to live any way they wanted to live. Every inclination of their heart was only evil all the time. It is what precipitated the flood. And Nimrod thought he could unite the world and that he would be in control. But Nimrod failed because God stopped him. Well, only the Antichrist is going to be successful in uniting the whole world, and he's only going to be successful for a very short period of time. It says in verse 8, all the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. Here's a qualifier. All whose names have not been written in the book of life, belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. You've heard me say many times that there will be this great revival in the last days. Those tribulation martyrs who will be overcome, they will die for their faith. Because the Lamb's Book of Life, those names have been entered since before the foundation of the world. Those names are already in the book. Jesus knows who they are. We saw them earlier in this book. The saints that were gathered together under the altar of God, having been martyred for their faith, crying out, "How long, O Lord? How long until you avenge our death?" And they were told, just a little while longer. Well, remaining faithful to Jesus Christ is going to cost them their lives. Even the few who survive will face unspeakable horror. They will end up in heaven with Jesus. They will not bow down or take the mark of the beast. And again, we're going to talk about the mark of the beast next time. And then he has this warning for us. And I'm going to paraphrase here. Use your ears to hear God. That's what he's saying. Use your ears to hear God. What does this all mean to us? In the last days, what should our response be to knowing these kinds of things? Now, I warn you that the book of Revelation, while everybody's excited about it at the beginning, the crowds thin out. It's not fun. This isn't something that we can high five over. This is terrible, terrible future. And it needs to motivate all of us to tell the people that we care about Jesus, to share the gospel. There's a few people that you might be able to scare into heaven by telling them how terrible it's going to be. But remember, our main job is to declare the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. Use your ears to hear. What should our response be to knowing that these things are going to happen? I know most of us have talked to our family members, the people that we're closest to, the people who don't want anything to do with you because you love Jesus. We've told them that this is going to happen. Jesus is coming. We've told them the story of the rapture, and they looked at us like we had a third eye in the middle of our forehead. But we got to keep telling them, because they need to be prepared. When they see us gone, they'll be the ones left behind who will say, they told me about this. I know what this is. Don't believe the lies. And at least they'll be saved. They'll have to go through unspeakable terror, but at least they'll make it to heaven. He explains, if anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be called, or be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. That word patient endurance is that one Greek word that we use here a lot at Calvary Chapel, hupomone. It's the willingness to stay under pressure even though there's an escape clause. Now we understand that during the Great Tribulation, the people that don't take the mark of the beast, they're going to be hunted down like criminals. They're not going to be able to eat. They're not going to be able to participate in any kind of an economy because they won't take the mark, and you have to take the mark to buy and to sell to participate. And here's what Jesus is saying to them. If you have to die for me, it's worth it. I'll be there with you. I'll be there for you. Earlier we were told their clothes would be washed, cleansed, and they would have the fine white linen of the saints to change into. And Jesus is just saying, look, if you're here on earth and you're going to be killed, it's going to happen. That's part of judgment. That's part of the consequences for not accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior when you had the opportunity to do this. And he's just telling them, hold on. Just like they told those tribulation saints under the altar, those who will die, be patient, vengeance is coming. What he's telling them on the earth is to be brave. Be strong. Don't look to the left, don't look to the right, don't look to the right. If that sounds a lot like Joshua, it does to me too. God is saying, look, I'll be there for you. I shared with you before that this great revival will be the greatest revival in the history of the world by far. By far. Nothing even close to it. And it'll be exciting. But it's going to cost them everything to trust Jesus Christ. Remember also that they're going to be given an out. The out is the mark of the beast. When things get really, really, really awful, Can you imagine the temptation to take the mark? Not just because they're hungry, but just because they can't stand to see all the death around them. All they have to do is take the mark and they have a way out. And Jesus is saying this calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. And there, those converts to Christianity during the Great Tribulation are included in with the church. They're included in as saints of God. As we close tonight, what does all this mean to you? We know people, maybe some of us used to be those people who would take sort of the fatalistic view, well, I don't know if all this is true, but if it happens, then I'll know it's true. Instead of believing now and escaping it, well, if it's true and I see it's true, well, then I'll believe then. I won't take the mark of the beast. But what makes any of us think that if we won't believe in Jesus and be obedient when it's easy to do it, when it costs nothing to do it? What makes us think that we're going to be brave when it will cost us everything? If you happen to be here and you're not a believer, there's no circumstance that allows you to escape the Great Tribulation. Maybe you're thinking, well, they've been saying Jesus is coming for 2,000 years. Peter describes under the inspiration of the Spirit that that's just a sign of God's infinite patience. He's unwilling that any should perish, but we also know from Romans chapter 11 that there's a limited number of Gentiles who are going to get saved. In a moment, we're going to have people up here, and you're going to be able to come up and pray. If you're not a believer, you can come up, and any one of these men and women will be able to tell you how to become a Christian. And wouldn't it be great while the worship team is up here and they're playing in the background and people are spread out and some are being prayed for, others are praying to give their heart to Jesus, some are praying just because things are going difficult and they need prayer. Wouldn't it be wonderful if just one person said, I believe in Jesus, I want to be saved, and service ends right there. No school set up again? This has to be practical to have any value at all for us. I told you way back at the beginning that because we won't be here during the Great Tribulation, we could just breeze through all of this. But here's what we need to understand. People we love are going to be here. And we've got to tell them about Jesus over and over and over. When they tell you to stop telling them about Jesus, say, nope, not going to do it because I love you. I can't imagine heaven without you. Share your faith. Take a risk. Be willing to be called a nut. Imagine the smile of Jesus when you do. He or she who has an ear, let him hear. Next week, religion re-enters the scene. The false prophet appears. That's next Friday night. Would men and women from the pastor's class, we don't have a lot of people here tonight, so we don't need everybody, but the men and women from the pastor's class, would you come up? Father, as we close tonight, I pray that if there's anybody here who doesn't know you, that tonight they would surrender their heart